Virtually Perfect defines a product lifecycle as having four phases: create, build, sustain, and dispose, as is shown here. The change is pain section I just went through and some other readings discuss how people react to technological innovation. In this section, I'll talk about processes. A common term when working with IT systems is people, process, and technology, but Greaves divides process into another role, which he calls practices. So he actually refers to people, process, practice, and technology. Processes are about what we do. Note the picture of the restaurant kitchen, which is very process-based. The cooks and the counter staff work from a preset list of tasks in order to meet customer needs. The focus is on efficiency and repeatability. Little or no innovation can happen here, and the customer is not looking for innovation. If I walk into McDonald's, I firmly believe that I will be handed a Big Mac in the first 90 seconds after I get there. However, if I go into McDonald's and ask for escargot, I'm just not going to get it, right? That's an innovation beyond which they're capable. Practices are about what we want to accomplish. Note the picture of the doctor's office. The goal of the medical staff is to make the patient healthy, whatever is required to do so, including, if necessary, never tried before techniques. We need to make the patient healthy, not just follow our own processes. Unfortunately, it is not always the case that what the organization does leads to what the organization wants to accomplish. Sometimes the processes are misaligned with the corporation's goals. Christensen gets into some practice process stuff in some of his stuff. I referred to Christensen earlier in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. This kind of post states that, but it can be found on their website, thechristenseninstitute.org. Christensen refers to an analogous concept of interdependence and modularity. A modular product, like a light bulb, is standardized, optimized, and rapidly adopted. Processes work best with modular components. Practices, on the other hand, are actions taken to reach an innovative goal which has never been achieved and are dependent upon multiple entities. Independent practices will develop an innovation. Interdependent practices will develop innovations, while modular processes can bring that innovation to scale. So there's some overlapping concept. I mean, if you read Virtually Perfect and then you come back and read the Christensen Institute, these are not exactly identical things, but there's a good 80% overlap between what in the concepts that they're talking about. So back to Greaves. This is a process, a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a well-defined end. Lean processes are definable, repeatable, and without idiosyncrasies. Our intent in defining a process is to reduce or eliminate variation. They are codable and calculable. They're refined to a set of inputs and outputs and can often be automated. They're efficient, their conclusions are predictable, and there's a minimal amount of wasted effort. And you can see this here. We've ratified the contract, then we conduct an inspection. Repairs either are or are not needed. So we have a well-known start point and 3 or 4 well-known endpoints from this process. Here's a process that I ran into on the very first day that I taught this class in 2013. At the time, I was teaching on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. and I arrived on campus at about 7:45 or so and found that the classroom door was locked. Neither I nor the class could enter the room. We were fortunate to find another room, but I clearly needed to get a new key. At the time, I was working Monday through Friday in Virginia, so I was consulting on a project in Virginia and then coming back home and teaching on Saturdays. So in order to get a room key, I first needed to obtain a copy of my offer letter from the dean's office in Dodge Hall. So that would prove that the dean says, yes, this is really somebody who's teaching for me. I was then told to take that letter to University Human Resources on the 3rd floor in Wilson Hall in order to prove my faculty status or get another document which would prove my faculty status. Actually, once I got to UHR, they told me I needed to go up one more flight of stairs to Academic Human Resources because I was a professor and not a student. So, with proof of status, I then needed to get a Spirit card from the Oakland Center. And then with the Spirit card, I went to Varner Hall and I had a room key made. And now finally I could come back to, at the time I was teaching in the Science and Engineering building, which now has a different name, Math and Science Center, I think, and I could open the classroom. Easy peasy, right? And note that many of these same problems appeared for all the faculty when the new engineering center was built in about 2015, and this took months to resolve until people had the keys to get into their offices. I'll come back to that. So this is practices. Practices are purposeful social relationships transmitting intergenerational knowledge. Practices look for innovation, Practices look for innovation to meet a newly defined result. They are poorly defined and they have idiosyncrasies. Innovation is looking for results that we've not seen before, while processes are attempts to always produce the same result. The practices often involve negotiation. Often the winner is the person who is most articulate, who yells the loudest and the fastest, and or who has the highest stature within the organization. However, this does not necessarily lead to the best result. In previous years, I have taught a unit on negotiation for just this reason. It didn't make the cut this year as I brought COVID into the lectures. There's a really good book on this though, called 3D negotiation, like three-dimensional negotiation. So talk to me about it, or feel free to look it up online. So now let's come back to a practice about instructor access to the classroom. So the existing processes leave the instructor, even if you would solve all the existing processes exactly as needed, it leaves the instructor with a physical key, and realistically, that physical key will never be returned. It doesn't matter how much we improve on the physical key process, there's no solution to that problem. So we need to look for a different solution than what the current process can provide. And in fact, the engineering center, more or less, is making use of digital keys. I don't think it's actually working, but at least in theory, there are digital card readers, and appropriate instructors and appropriate students should be able to use the card readers in order to get into the labs. Once again, I don't think it's actually working. So we could use keys much like a hotel room key in order to get in and out, and then we wouldn't need to change the locks every time that a professor leaves, and we could start just having much better control over the doors. However, in 2021, this is my classroom, which is a former bedroom in my house. And assuming that I don't lose the key to my house, which is a whole bigger problem, it's not a problem to get into the office from which I teach, or the classroom in which I teach. The innovation in this case required for a new solution is that the key isn't needed at all. In fact, the campus is not needed at all. Which brings up a significant role that all the universities are starting to look at. In practice, what is the role of the university campus? Campuses have a large fixed cost. I'm not sure what campus this is. I just found it in stock photos, but you can see there's large buildings that need to be maintained with large lawns, and they need to be heated, and there's new buildings that have been constructed, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many, 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 many millions of dollars in that university campus. However, the demographics for universities has not been looking good for a number of years now. The number of sixth graders has been decreasing for over a decade, and the number of sixth graders in 2010 gives an indication on the number of college students in 2018 and 2019 follows. And then there's been the whole issue of how has COVID impacted the schools. So in a recent article, and this is in February of 2021, a recent article in the Chronicle of Higher Education estimates that COVID-19 has led to $85 billion in lost revenues, $24 billion in COVID-related expenses, $74 billion in decreased state funding, and totaling $183 billion in losses. Now, these were estimates based on about 100 schools who answered the survey, and then they multiplied it out. So I don't think we know what this truly is yet, but the opening factor on schools is on higher education is quite challenging. And I found this graph interesting, if disheartening. About 600,000 workers have lost their jobs on academic campuses in the past year. And then getting to this class, I will have there's in the winter of 21, there are 16 students enrolled in this class. One other student from Europe reached out to me because she was interested in some stuff I was talking about on LinkedIn. So over the course of the semester, and then one student was out of the country, another student had to travel out of the country. The 16 students will be in 4 different countries on 3 different continents over the course of this semester. And this really asks the question of what is the purpose of the physical campus as lessons move online. And I think we'll see some big impact on that. I absolutely believe there's value in face-to-face learning. There's also value in being able to spread that education far and wide. So I think there's a big balance in play. But the practice of the university campus, I think, is a big question that will need to be answered over the next few years. Okay, back to Mike Greaves' book. There's a continuum between practices and process. It's not either you're a practice or you're a process. You kind of move from one realm to another. So practice is purposeful social relationships, transmitting intergenerational knowledge. It's about what we want to accomplish. Processes are a series of actions or steps in order to achieve an end. Practices are about innovation and applied change. Processes streamline in order to eliminate variation. Practices are hard to predict, whereas processes strive for predictability. Practices are goal-driven and fuzzy. Processes are routine and precise. Practices include negotiation and argument, while processes seek to remove the human element through codification and calculation. Engineers really like processes. We like to codify and calculate. So practices are about effectively satisfying a goal, while processes are about efficiency and optimization. Practices are about collecting the maximum amount of information available and then deciding what's needed. Processes seek to eliminate unnecessary information and provide only the level of training that is needed. This may be one of my oldest slides. In the past, I made homemade pizza on Friday evenings for my late wife and I would make my own pizza dough. I began with a recipe, and recipes are very process-driven, which called for cups of flour. But I learned through online cooking shows that flour is best measured by weight using a scale rather than volume using a cup. Weighing flour then became a practice that I followed. The original process of using cups is efficient for a kitchen with cups, but not a scale. Intergenerational knowledge through the cooking show encouraged me to spend a few dollars on a scale, and this became my new process, and I eventually streamlined it into whatever baking that I do with flour. Practices are learned through education, a deeper understanding of the universe not specifically applied to the task at hand. So what I learned about pizza dough had actually arisen from bread making and brownie making and those sorts of things. Any recipe which uses flour is better made by measuring weight rather than volume, not only pizza dough. However, most recipes still use cups. YouTube has become a means of sharing intergenerational knowledge, as can be seen here. The challenge of measuring flour is that the granules can become compressed. If you measure by weight, the compensation doesn't matter. In this video, she shows a means to randomize the granules such that an appropriate amount of air is returned to the volume. Eventually, this becomes her process, much as weighing is mine, and she or her kids no longer think about why they measure that way. They just follow the process. So can processes be innovative? Albert Einstein says it is insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, and innovation is inherently new. Innovation by definition is different than what we've known before, yet processes are designed to eliminate variation. Is it possible to develop a lean process for developing innovation? Can innovation ever run smoothly? If we limit innovation to that which runs smoothly, can it ever be disruptive? Or are efficient organizations inherently ripe to be disrupted by organizations outside of them? Are they inherently ripe for disruptions from others? So can an innovation be both lean and innovative? Maybe another way to look at lean is as a mechanism for collective learning. If we think back to Teiichi Ohno's introduction of lean at Toyota in the 1950s, he lowered inventories to bring problems to the surface and forced those problems to be solved through quality circles. I posit that the true nature of lean is not in running smooth processes, but in the collective learning required to make the processes smoother. If we codify and automate our processes to run smoothly, we lose our ability to collectively learn. I first built this slide when I was a lead architect for one of the PLM technology companies. It was the role of my team to implement new technology in a client organization, which would make the client's engineering processes run more smoothly. The approach was to sit down with a customer and ask, what are your requirements? For example, please develop 100 plus pages covering 1,000 plus requirements of a technology with which you have no experience, and note that it will cost you money anytime you change your mind. You may recall my earlier slide that said that change is painful, the status quo seems far more efficient, and technology changes culture, but cultures resist change. There are power centers in the organization which have built up around the existing technology. And your customer will see your simple request as being a painful and inefficient threat. They won't tell you, but what they're thinking is, there's just no effing way that we're going to do this. And the need to innovate will trigger the fight or flight response, where first, no one will return your calls or emails when you're trying to get something done, and that's the flight response. Followed by suddenly a meeting will be called and you'll need to defend your actions to your client's boss for the lack of progress that you've made, and that would be the fight response. So you won't hear from your contact at all until suddenly you're in a meeting where you're really struggling to survive. Once again, the writings of Christensen and Greaves overlap. So this is from The Innovator's Dilemma, and it looks at processes which inhibit change. At the start, when they're small, organizations' capabilities are tied to the individuals which started the organization. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. At this point, they're in the practice stage. Over time, capabilities shift. As people gain success, processes become more defined, and the business model takes on shape and values coalesce. As companies mature, employees assume that their existing priorities are the right way to work. However, as individuals base decision on values rather than decisions, a culture begins to form. While the culture defines what the company can do, it also defines what the company cannot do. When capabilities become embedded in culture, change is extraordinarily difficult. And I talked earlier about the transition from electric fuel vehicles from internal combustion drivetrains to electric fuel drivetrains. And I think this sort of culture change is coming to the automotive market. Managers find it extraordinarily difficult to keep resources focused on the pursuit of disruptive technology until all other alternatives have been eliminated. So we don't want to change. You have to prove that you've tried everything before we're willing to change. Products that do not appear to be useful to customers today, which would be disruptive technologies, may squarely address their needs tomorrow. We cannot expect our current customers to lead us towards innovations that they do not now need, but they may need in the future. The highest performing companies have well-developed systems for killing off ideas that customers don't currently want. And as a result, these companies find it very difficult to invest adequate resources in disruptive technologies until their customers want them, at which point it's too late. Recall the big steel versus mini mills disruptive innovation conversation in the earlier lecture. So this is my takeaways from this video. Thank you for watching. They are: processes look to efficiently achieve a well-understood goal, and processes are about what we do. Practices involve learning in order to accomplish something which has never been done before. Practices are about what we want to accomplish. In dysfunctional organizations, however, what they want to accomplish is frequently not aligned to what their processes actually do. That's the very nature of dysfunction, is that we do certain things, but they're not aligned with what we want. Processes do not require change and therefore seem efficient. They do not challenge the status quo. For these reasons, a strong set of processes make it very difficult for a corporation to innovate.